Hey everyone, today we have with us Philip. Philip is a recent grad and he's working at Base 10 right now.
Hey, good to be here. I've done one of these episodes before, but it's been a couple years, and I have a bunch of new information to share about working at startups and using them as a great platform to grow your career.
Also, Philip, I would say the reviews of the first podcast, a lot of people found that really interesting and had a couple of questions. So this particular episode will be sort of building on top of that one and taking all those questions into account and what students on campus want to hear.
All
So
right, well, let's call it going forth 201 then.
going for 201. Oh, something I forgot to mention. Congratulations on the Series B funding.
Oh,
That
thank
that
you.
was
That
really
was a really
amazing.
exciting. That was a really exciting, announcement email to send.
I bet. I saw that message on LinkedIn, and I was like, "This is amazing."
It's
Uh,
super cool. I actually joined Base 10 before we announced our Series A, and
uh-huh.
so it's been cool to see that entire cycle a couple of times.
That's really interesting. I could only imagine how excited everyone would be. You and everyone on the base end would be to like shoot that email, made that LinkedIn post. Like it's just it's just amazing feeling, I guess.
Yeah. So one secret about startups is that generally, once you read about the funding announcement in the news,
Yeah.
it's already fully processed. The money's been in the bank for a minute or two,
Yep.
and you're already thinking about less about like, oh, we just got this massive amount of money, and you're thinking a lot more about how excited you are to grow the team, grow your
Yep.
customer base, and just take everything you're doing and then take it to that next level. And the money is just a mechanism for doing that.
True. True. Um, before we keep on conversation about base Stan and you, I want to give them a little bit of context. So, Can we start by how you came to work at base Stan? What base Stan is exactly?
Of course. So I was a Grinnell College computer science major, class of 2020, and I joined Base 10 a couple years later after I graduated. I'd worked at a few different jobs. I'd worked as a programmer, I'd worked in marketing, and ultimately I found this technical writer job because in January of 2022, I was doing kind of a big job search. I'd been working on some independent projects for a few months, doing some freelancing, and I decided, you know what, I really miss working on a team. I'm ready to get back into the industry and build something with other people. So I went to Hacker News and a bunch of other sources and just found a bunch of interesting companies. And Base 10 really stood out to me as a company that was working on interesting problems. We are kind of a AI infrastructure platform focused on model inference. But back then, Base 10 was more of a platform for data scientists to ship full stack apps. So I found the company really interesting. I thought the founding team was cool, and I reached out to them. I just sent, they had a jobs at base10.co. So I sent a cold email to them saying, "Hey, this is me. This is everything I've done," with links to portfolio pieces, projects, stuff we'll talk about later in the episode. And off of that cold email, I was able to interview and get hired. And that's pretty rare at a startup. For a company like Base 10, most people who work there are going to be recruited either by the founders, the investors, or some other network.
Yep.
But I was able to just, send that email, build on the back of my portfolio, and join the company. And it's been well over 2 years now, and I'm still loving it there. So again, Base 10 is a AI infrastructure platform, and it's a Series B startup. Right now, it's about 30 people, which means I get to do a ton of different things. I work on documentation, I work on blog posts. So we have a bunch of different teams doing research and development and building the product, and I'm able to take their work and bring it to a technical audience. And then I do a ton of random other stuff too because it's a startup. Like next month, I'm going to go to Google Cloud Next and
Yep.
represent us there. I go to like hackathons that we sponsor and hang out with students. I do all kinds of fun stuff. And that's why I really like working at a startup is because you get a ton of variety in your day to day work.
True. You get to wear the multiple hats and enjoy
Yeah,
it at the same time. Yeah. Yep.
exactly. I don't think I can fit another hat in my closet. I've got so many of them.
But trading over what you just said. So I wanted to expand a little bit more about what is supporting machine learning infrastructure because a lot of people who are listening to this podcast might not exactly be a computer science major. So we want to break down. Base 10, what does the company do in like simplest of the terms that you can explain?
Sure, sure. So the actual product and our users are highly technical, but the
Mm-hmm.
premise is pretty simple. So you know about AI models like ChatGPT. ChatGPT, people call it a model. It's actually a product. It's a whole platform, and it runs on top of a model that's going to be GPT 3.5, GPT 4, whatever. So that model is a bunch of it's a bunch of numbers. It's a bunch of weights. It's a huge file, like
Yeah.
a multiple gigabyte, many gigabyte file with trillions and trillions or billions and billions of parameters. Um, and what you need to do with this file is you need to put it on a GPU. That's a graphics processing unit. It's a specialized piece of hardware that's really good at running batch processes and parallel computation on matrices. And you need to connect that piece of hardware to the internet in a
Mm-hmm.
stable and secure and performant manner. So there's a ton of different sticking points and pain points along that entire stack. And what
Yeah.
we do is we specialize in helping companies take machine learning models, which are again just these big collections of these things called model weights. It's just a ton of numbers that you put data through and get data out of. You
Mm-hmm.
take these files and you put them on GPUs, and you have to make sure that they run really efficiently. That's the first challenge that we help with. And then you need to take these GPUs and connect them to the internet. That's the second challenge we help with. And then the final challenge that we help with is you're going to get a lot of traffic, and that traffic is going to be inconsistent. And
Mm-hmm.
so we help balance that traffic, make sure it's getting routed to replicas that have availability so that you can process all of your users' requests without downtime and without, super long waiting periods. And that entire stack has to be wrapped in a set of tools that are really easy for developers to use because every single one of those things I just talked about is its own specialization within computer science. But we
Mm-hmm.
want to make it easy for one person to do everything with just basic Python tools.
That sounds amazing, and something like which could have, especially with all the new models coming in, I think that could have a huge application.
Yeah, model inference is it's a big industry right now. We're definitely
Mm-hmm.
not the only team working on this problem, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just a super exciting space to be in.
True, true. So, what are like some of your biggest customers who are using this in their day-to-day life, which are running their models on this right now?
Yeah, so we have a few public reference customers,
Mm-hmm.
companies like Descript and Picnic Health and Patreon, sort
Mm-hmm.
of a range of use cases. We can support text to speech, speech to text, like audio transcription. We can support image generation. We can
Got
support,
it.
of course, large language models, which
Mm-hmm.
are the things that power popular things like ChatGPT. And one thing that's really exciting about Base 10 is the amount of support that we have for open source models.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, for example, Llama, which is a model by Facebook, that's a GPT
Yeah.
competitor. Now, Llama is actually an open source model, which means that anyone can run it on their own hardware
Mm-hmm.
and you can actually look at the model weights, kind of figure out how it works, train your own models based on it. So we're able to take models like that and really optimize them for production use and bring them to customers who might otherwise just have to kind of stick with some closed source proprietary model.
Got it. Got it. So it's building on top of open source models as well, like giving. Uh, how would you put it in like exact words? Like you are tuning in, fine tuning the open source model for the people to use it.
Yeah, so
Uh,
Base 10 currently doesn't support something called fine tuning,
mm-hmm.
which is basically the process of taking an established model and altering it
Yeah.
slightly to fit a different use case. What we
Mm-hmm.
are hyper focused on at the moment is taking a finished model, however that model was
Mm.
created, and running
Yep.
it in production as fast as possible and as reliably as possible.
Got it. Got it. That's interesting. Um, you mentioned a few points in your previous answer that you looked for jobs at Hacker News and all those places. I think Hacker News is actually one of the underrated sources of how to finding a job, especially when you're looking for startups. People usually go for LinkedIn or job platforms, but Hacker News is, I think, still underrated. How many opportunities you could have. But I'm curious, like, how did your job process look like? Was it like Hacker News? You said was one, but what other platforms did you use to find your first job or internship even?
Yeah, I think that what I've found is that if you do the same things as everyone else, you're going to get the same results as everyone else.
True.
And in job searching, especially how it is today, that's not a result that you want.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I didn't know any better, right? I went on LinkedIn, I went on Handshake, and I just filled out the forms. I put it, uploaded my resume, and then you've got to type in all the information that was already in your resume, and then you got
Hmm.
to do that a few hundred times every semester, and then you get nothing,
Yeah.
and it's a pretty terrible experience. And you know, from having been on the other side of the table now in hiring at various companies, it's not a great experience for the hiring manager at the company either, because you just get this giant stack of
Yeah.
resumes that you have to go through, and half of them are incomplete or just totally off base for the job, and it's just a lot of time gets wasted on both sides of the table. What I've
True.
found helps a lot instead, and there's some prerequisites to being able to do this. And the number one prerequisite is marketable skills expressed in a portfolio, which we'll talk about that later. But
Hmm.
the in order to break out of that cycle of going to LinkedIn, filling out a bunch of resume forms, and hearing nothing back, you have to find unique sources of opportunities. My very first job in tech, I actually found by going to a hackathon, meeting someone there, interviewing with him directly, and working there. I've
Hmm.
also found jobs through this forum called Hacker News, which has a monthly who is hiring post where engineers and other people directly involved in hiring at a company are posting roles at their company and contact information for you to get in touch with them. And I've even
Yeah.
had success with just cold emailing the founders of different companies and saying, "Here's what I can do. It looks like you're looking for these skills, so let me bring this to your company." And they tend to be interested in that.
Interesting. So, for all the listeners, this might be a note that cold emailing works. Like, you need to know how to phrase it. Like, you need to focus on the pinpoints, and you need to know who to mail it to. And along with that, you have other resources like Hacker News and all the stuff that you could be doing. And especially this connects me to a personal branding sort of domain, which we also talked about in the last podcast. But I think um, that was left a little untouched. We can explore that even further. But I think after your first opportunity, you kind of built that personal branding and associated yourself with a particular domain. For which, whenever someone thinks of that, they think of, okay, Philip. Philip is the person to go for this. I want to know how the process of personal branding worked. Like, how did the process look like for you?
Personal branding is just like trying to build anything, in
Yeah.
that it's a long-term process where you're going to rely on compounding small wins into really big ones.
Mm-hmm.
When you get started, it's super hard. When I got started, if you Googled Philip Kiely, you got this dentist or pediatrician, some medical professional in, I think it was like
Yeah.
Vermont or New Hampshire or something. I'm sure he's a great guy. I'd love to meet him one day. But he was at the top of Google search results for my name, and I was not going to let that stand. So the very first thing that I did is I started building myself a digital footprint. I wanted there to be an impression on the internet of I am here, I am me. And I
Mm-hmm.
started doing that my very first year of college. That's a LinkedIn, that's a Twitter if you're, in the tech space where that's a big thing, or, maybe if you're in photography or fitness, that's going to be an Instagram instead. So you want your LinkedIn, and you want one or two social media platforms. YouTube's great for that. It really doesn't matter which platform, it just matters that you're consistent there.
Mm-hmm.
But the number one thing that I did, and this is the most applicable to computer science majors and other people looking for technical careers, but honestly, I think everyone should do this because there are ways to do it without coding skills, is I made myself a personal website to show off my portfolio. And I was fortunate, no one had bothered to buy philipkiley.com, so I just went there and I grabbed it. A
Yeah.
domain name, it's not that expensive. It's like $20 a year max.
Hmm.
That's an amazing investment to make in having a space on the internet that you own. It's not made by some other company. It's not going to be, taken away in some algorithm shift. It's a
Yep.
place for you to build your entire digital identity around. It's the hub of your wheel. So my website started out as a piece of garbage. It was a terrible website. It looked like
Hmm.
someone who had no idea how to code had spent an hour putting random stuff together on his computer and then just
Yep.
shipped it up to GitHub Pages, because that's exactly what happened. But I just kept building it. Freshman year, I had a terrible website. Sophomore year, I had a bad website. Junior
Hmm.
year, I had, well, it was an interesting website. Let's put it that way. But by senior year and by the time I graduated, and what I have now is actually a pretty good website. But I never would have gotten to having a pretty good website and all the opportunities that brings if I hadn't
Hmm.
started with a terrible one.
Yeah. You had a website, but how did you market yourself? Like, how did that website reaches people?
Of
Did,
course, it's not enough to just buy a domain name, stick a picture of yourself on it, and be like, hey, I'm here. No one's going to find that.
yeah.
You have to take the same sort of techniques that companies use to sell their product or sell their
Hmm.
services, and use that to sell your services and sell the ideas that you want to bring into the world. The number one thing that I do, both professionally for my job and also personally to reach a wider audience, is something called content marketing. And it's really simple. You make something that you think people are going to want to pay attention to, and then you
Hmm.
put it on the internet and you bring it to forums and communities where the sort of people who might be interested in hang out. And you say, hey,
Yeah.
I made this thing. Take a look at it. And you get ignored. No one pays attention to it. Maybe someone tells you to go away.
Yeah.
And then you do that like 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 more times. And eventually people start to pay attention, because over the process of making this stuff, you get better and better at making it. You get better at understanding what your audience is looking
Hmm.
for. And through that consistency, you're able to start to develop a brand. And a brand is not something that you sit down in. You don't go to the husk and grab a whiteboard and say, all right, I'm going to plan my whole personal brand out here on that whiteboard. It's
Yeah.
useful to pick one or two things that you want to organize yourself around, but really this is going to happen organically as you grow and change, your interests evolve, and you discover what there's a market for that overlaps with what you want to do.
Hmm. For all the listeners who are listening right now, I think we could break down into for first year, second years, third year, fourth years. You could break down into, if you haven't started in personal branding yet, you should at least have one social account where you are pushing your content. If you can, you should be making some form of content, either written content or whatever type of content you like and you think that audience would love. And basically you should be showcasing your skills and plugging in, have a particular place on the internet where you can keep all that repository intact and people to visit and see your work at. And foremost thing, you should have some place where they could reach out to you, either you should have either a Gmail account or your LinkedIn link to that website, but something that the person who is visiting the website could also reach out to you. So I think that would be a great starting point, as what you mentioned for a personal branding. But here's the point you mentioned, that content creation, which is really interesting, because I personally really struggle with it. Struggle with writing a lot, and what I want to know is, like, you were into the field of technical writing, so and I know you are a big fan of writing. And for all the people who haven't heard the first episode, Philip also wrote a book. Um, so we could talk about we could also talk about that. Awesome, awesome. Writing for software engineers
Yes,
and
writing for software developers. Yep,
software developers. Sorry, but I think you can get a free copy if you're a Grinnell student if you mail Philip.
you sure
So
can.
keep that in mind if you want to give it a read, and you should. But what I'm curious is, like, how does this process of content creation look for you? Like, is it something like you plan out, okay, I'm gonna write on this, I'm gonna list all the points that I want to cover in this particular blog article, or like how does this entire process maps out?
Yeah. The first thing I want to say is that content creation does not have to be writing. You,
Hmm.
Adosh, you're doing content creation right now. You're making a podcast with your
Yeah.
face on it, your voice in it, your name on the description.
Hmm.
And if you're not a writer, that's totally fine because there are tons of modalities that you can create content in. And not everyone likes to read. I know a ton of people who don't like to read. And my work
Yeah.
is not really going to reach them. So if I want to reach those different audiences, I need to make a different format of content.
Yeah.
When I think about content creation, it really comes down to what I'm excited to write about. For work, obviously, I think what we do at Base 10 is really cool, but it's also my job to write about it. So if there's one particular topic that I'm really excited about and a different particular topic that maybe it's more important for us to write about, well, I'm going to have to put down the one I'm excited about and do the one that we need to do.
Yeah.
But when you're making content for yourself, you should really follow your own interests. That's the number one thing because that's going to make you excited to work on it because you're writing about things you care about. And it's
Hmm.
going to make your content better because you're going to be more experienced and skilled and have more opinions and expertise in the topics that you care about. When it comes to actually sitting down and doing it, here's the thing. People love to give writing advice, right? I wrote a whole book of writing advice. And the reason that writers love talking about writing advice and tools and techniques and publishing and editing and all this other stuff is you can talk about everything else except for the writing itself because everything else is fun. It's
Yeah.
exciting. It's, picking what you want the cover of your book to be. That's fun. Sitting down every day and putting your hands on the keyboards and getting those couple thousand words out every day, that's the worst. No one wants to talk about that. No one wants to hear about it because there's no advice to give them. You just got to do it.
Hmm.
When I think about sitting down to write content, I want to make sure that there's a topic that I'm excited about, and I want to make sure that I have a plan and an outline. And what that comes from is an understanding of not just the topic, but also the audience I'm trying to reach. Right now, I'm doing a podcast for college students, which is an audience
Yeah.
that I love working with. But I'm going to be giving very different advice and talking about very different topics than if I was doing a podcast for, say, startup CEOs who want to learn about ML. For them, I'm not going to be telling them about career stuff because their careers are way
Yeah.
past mine. I'm going to be
Yeah.
diving into super deep technical details about, oh, actually, if you quantize these models to FP8, well, you're going to get a huge uplift in the amount of tokens per second you're able to process. But if I start bringing that high technical detail to, a second year sociology major, they're going to be like, "What? I'm going to go do something else." So
Yeah.
that's the number one most important thing after you've picked a topic you're excited about is picked an audience that you're excited to bring that topic to and figure out what their needs are. What do they want? What are their questions? What goals do they have? And how can your content help them reach those goals?
Yeah.
Once I have a topic and an audience, I can build an outline. I can put together 3 or 4 things I want to write about. And then, you just got to do it. You just got to sit down, get
Hmm.
some, get some nice music going, get yourself a drink, a snack, whatever you need, and just put the words down. I really like to write in concentrated bursts where I'll spend 2, 3, 4 hours working
Yeah.
on a single thing and not getting distracted and switching around a bunch. But I also like to write with breaks. So after one of those sessions, I don't want to publish it right away. I want to let it sit for a day or two, think about
Hmm.
it while I'm taking a shower and doing all this other stuff, come back to it, finish it up, and then put it out.
Got it.
So it's that mixture of, really concentrated work time with making sure that you're building enough time into your publishing timeline that you're
Hmm.
able to let the things you're working on sit while you do other things and think about it in the background.
Got it. You gotta give them time to bake. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, you gotta give it time to bake. But this is really interesting because you are a technical writer, which I think has own aspects to it. So, for example, if let's say tomorrow Based comes up with a new product or something, a totally different line of products that you don't know anything about. So, I think how would that change things? Like something new is released. Is it like a meeting where all the technical writers and developers are in the same room? They are like talking about explaining, walking you through um, the new pipeline of work, or is it like um, in a startup you have to figure it out on your own by looking at what the new product is or explaining it to the
See, that's
explaining
my
in form
favorite
of
part of the job is
yeah.
learning these new things. So I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
an example. A few months ago, Base 10 started to really focus more on model performance. We'd always
Mm-hmm.
cared about how fast you can run the models, but we put together like a dedicated team that was going to figure out how you can take these models and run them
Yeah.
not just well, not just quickly, but run them as fast as possible. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a highly technical field that's beyond anything I learned in class. And, these people on the team, they're taking research papers, they're taking pre release software from companies like NVIDIA, and they're figuring out how to take these cutting edge techniques and make them stable enough to run in production. And then I
Yeah.
need to explain to a technical audience what's going on there. So I don't know anything about what's going on. But the thing is,
Yeah.
the audience doesn't necessarily know either. So I'm in the same boat as my audience. I just have a lot more experience grabbing these new concepts that I don't know anything about and diving deep into them. And I
Mm-hmm.
also have the resource of everyone on my team. So I'm able to go talk to the engineers and the experts who are creating these new things. And I'm able to I know now which questions to ask them. I know how to get them to explain these things in a way that's going to make sense to me. And
Mm-hmm.
then I can package that explanation, put it with metaphors and similes and some visual diagrams and all the other writing tricks that make it easier to understand a new topic. So maybe I'll take 10 or 20 or 30 hours to write a blog post that's only 1,000 words. It's going to take someone 10 minutes to read.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend 10 hours working on that. Honestly, more. 10 hours is not very much for a blog post. I've spent
Mm-hmm.
10 times that on certain blog posts. And if I spend that time and develop that understanding and figure out how to chart a course through these difficult topics, then I'm able to spend that time. It takes me 10 hours, takes someone
Mm-hmm.
else 10 minutes, but I've saved that person 9 hours and 50 minutes in figuring out this topic. And that's
Yeah.
the value that I've provided to them. They could go and do all the same things that I did to figure it out, but instead they're able to just take 10 minutes, learn about it, and then immediately go use it in their work. So that's the value that I'm providing to my audience when I'm able to bring them all of this information about these new topics.
That's amazing because uh, you're right. Like they could also do it. It's just gonna take you 10 hours, or you could just read it 10 minutes because I gave you those 10 hours before. So that's beautiful.
And that's where
Um,
the leverage comes in technical writing.
true.
So let's say I spend 10 hours to understand a topic, and then I write it so that someone can take it in 10 minutes and they can, go do it.
Yeah.
Well, the next person, it's also only going to take them 10 minutes. So if,
Mm-hmm.
if 60 people read it in 10 minutes, well, then that's, that they've spent collectively that
Yeah.
10 hours. But instead of 10 hours for one person to know it, now 10 hours,
Yeah.
60 people
60
know
people
it.
know it.
And that just keeps scaling up. So I
Mm-hmm.
spend the 10 hours once to make this piece of content. And then it doesn't matter if one person reads it or 1,000 people read it or 100,000 people read it. They're
Mm-hmm.
all going to be able to get the same benefits with no extra work from me.
True. True. It's like one person doing the main part of the job, and others are people building on top of that particular job executed. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's like a bank account. It
Icon.
pays
Mm.
interest.
Pays interest. True.
And that's why companies are willing to pay money to have people create technical content because it's an asset that continues to deliver value over time. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why, on a personal branding perspective, it's worth investing in creating content and creating really good content
Mm-hmm.
because that's going to be an asset in your portfolio that's going to deliver value over time.
Good. Makes sense. Also, you mentioned something about based on releasing their new model, like new product line that you just said. So I'm just curious, like, what's next for Based on, especially after you guys had a Series B funding? How does that changes things? I know that you guys would have already known about your Series B funding way before the announcement. So I think the processes have already been in place by now. But um, how have things changed, and what can we expect in like near future?
Yeah, so I want to zoom out first and just
Yeah.
talk about what you can expect at any startup that you join when
Mm-hmm.
they raise money. So
Mm-hmm.
a tech startup, its main expense, well, it's got two main expenses, but the number one expense is going to be people. After that, maybe you've got, for a company like Base 10, you've got hosting charges. We got to pay money to AWS and
Yeah.
Google for these GPUs that we're using and stuff. But the number one expense for any technical startup is going to be people. So when a company raises money, it
Yeah.
gives them something called runway. So that's how many months they can operate, because most startups don't make money, or make money but don't make a profit.
Yeah.
They're instead focused on growth. So they raise a new round of funding to extend their runway. But you don't want your runway to be 10, 20, 30 years into the future. That's not the point. Your investors are looking for you to build something and return money on a shorter time frame than that.
Mm-hmm.
And your market is going to be growing and expanding, and you need to be operating really quickly in order to keep up and capture more market share. So, what a company is going to do when they expand their runway is they're going to increase their burn. So, what that is that's how much money you're spending every month on stuff like salaries and tools and marketing and all the different things that you need to operate your company.
Yeah.
So, any company that raises a round of new funding is going to use that funding to invest in accelerating their growth. And that comes from making the product better, that comes from doing more sales and marketing to find new customers, that comes from
Yeah.
hiring to be able to support those customers. With Base
Mm-hmm.
10 in particular, a few things that we're really excited to invest in is first and foremost that model performance side. We're also investing in new ways of making the product more valuable, where
Mm-hmm.
that can look like, instead of us providing this like one dedicated endpoint where you can go get your model, instead we're going to provide more of a set of tools to integrate these ML models into your broader application, which is called like an orchestration layer. And so that's
Nice.
going to save the developer teams who are using Base 10 even more time. We also have, a ton of different ideas about other places we're going to go to get more GPUs, to
Mm-hmm.
scale up our operations on the infrastructure side, to make our product available in more countries and more geographic regions. So all of those are sort of the standard things. What
Makes
I'm
sense.
interested in is, how at this point, I've been there for a couple of years. How am I going to be able to grow my career in that? Because ordinarily, if you're like me, you're 24 years old, you've done a few cool things, but again, you're 24 years old, you don't really know anything yet.
Yeah.
And if you go join a big company, you're going to have a very specific role where you have a clear set of responsibilities, and it's almost like being in school again. You're kind of judged on how well can you do the things that you expected to do, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not given a ton of responsibility to go beyond that. Well, at a small company, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how old you are. All that matters is what can you do, because the company needs things done immediately, and it just needs them done well, and it doesn't really matter who does it. So what I'm excited about is taking the type of work that I've been doing, especially on the content marketing side, where I'm able
Mm-hmm.
to reach these audiences who really need Base 10, give them valuable things that help them learn what's going on in the space, and in return get them interested in our product. How can I take the efforts that I've been making there and really scale them up, bring more people into the team,
Yeah.
and figure out how we're going to grow our brand and grow our business and grow our audience to that next level that we need to get to in order to succeed in what is a super crowded and super competitive market full of awesome companies. I just happen to think we're the best one.
That's that's amazing, and it brings me to my. Uh, it gives me a lot of interesting questions. Like, how how should a student, as you are, let's say, if you're a third or fourth year student, how would you weigh in your pros and cons between choosing a startup to work in a startup or to work in a big tech company?
That's a
How would
great
you?
question.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that when you're trying to decide whether or not you want to join a big company or a startup, it really comes down to what you're looking for in your career. If you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for a lot of structure and you're looking for dedicated programs that are going to help you get better at a really specific thing, then definitely look into a big company. Plus, you get great salary, good benefits. Like there's a lot to say for working at big companies.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who have gone to big tech companies or even big companies outside of the tech space and are having a really good time there and are able to build impactful careers. There's also a definite ladder of progression. You know exactly what that next level is and you know what you need to do
Yeah.
to get there. It's just a question of doing it. But what you can get at a startup is you can get a level of impact and access and learning that you just wouldn't get anywhere else. At a company of even a few hundred, much less a few thousand people, I'm not going to be working with senior leadership every day. I'm not going to be able to, just put a little shirt on that says base 10 and
Yeah.
go to events and go to podcasts and conferences and stuff and represent the company. I'm not going to be able to publish the type of things that I'm publishing on the type of cadence that I'm publishing at them at without this like huge review process. And I definitely wouldn't be able to kind of choose my own adventure every day and rely on my skills and rely on my business judgment to decide what the most valuable thing I could work on is, make a
Mm-hmm.
case for working on that, and then go execute and deliver on the promises that I make. So, if you're a student, if you're a third and fourth year student, and you're thinking, maybe I should start my own company. I did that, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a little bit of success, not a ton. I don't want to, warn anyone off from entrepreneurship because I think it's a great thing to do, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that there are tons of people who are, right at that stage in life and decide that the next thing is they're going to go into entrepreneurship, they're going to start their own company, and they totally crush it. Um,
Yeah.
but for me, what I ultimately found out is that I maybe wasn't quite ready yet. I didn't have the right knowledge and the right vision to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And so,
Mm-hmm.
in order to gain that, I needed to go join a company where I would have the same, obviously not as much freedom and independence as you have as an entrepreneur, but enough to kind of figure out what you like, figure out what you're good at. So if you're interested in entrepreneurship, but you're not necessarily ready to start your own company day one, definitely go check out a startup because that's where you're going to be able to learn what you need to do without
Yeah.
having, every single thing be resting on your shoulders. And the other thing I want to say is that there's a ton of opportunities in both the tech world and the job market in general that's in between, three people in a garage and Microsoft. That's the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people focus on either the 5 or 10 biggest companies in the world or in the industry, or I have to start something from scratch. But I worked at a company called Mugforged, both as an intern and right after graduating.
Yeah.
That was a 3, 4, 500 person company, depending on the time. And that was a really cool experience because I got more structure than you would get at a tiny startup, but also some independence and some definite flexibility in my role and what I needed to do. I've worked at a big company. I've worked at Fortune 500 companies like Principal.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked at 1,000 person companies. I've worked at 20 person companies, and I've freelanced for companies even smaller than that. So I
Yeah.
think using your internships and your freelance projects and your externships, winter break things, whatever you can to get a sense of not just the two ends of the spectrum, but the various steps in between is going to be
Mm-hmm.
super helpful for finding the right size company for you and the right fit for what you need at this
Mm-hmm.
stage in your career.
True. I think it's more of an exploration process where you have to figure out which one suits you the best, or which one you think you are the most comfortable with, or you think you grow the most in. So I think it also varies from person to person, and as Philip said, you need that time of entire college, I would say the entire college process is basically an exploration of which part do you think of the element do you think you fit in. So definitely. With that, I would take the one last question that we had is, you mentioned about difference between a startup and a big tech company, and how does whenever a startup raises money, they look into more into hiring. So I want to make sure that students know how they can position themselves so that first they are on the top of the list of recruiters, and second of all, even when they're recruited, they are doing really well, and especially in terms of a startup system.
For sure. So when you join a big company, you get a ton of training, right? When your whole first week as an intern is just going to be going to events and getting handbooks and presentations and all this sort of stuff, meeting your team,
Yeah.
and you're going to have a specialized team that you're on. You're going to have a designated intern project that you work on. That who knows if that's even ever going to make it to see the light of day.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at a startup or some bigger companies, definitely have actually managed to. Every big company says they operate like a startup. Some actually still do. Some
Mm-hmm.
have kept that spirit. When you join there, day one, they give you a laptop. They maybe you spend an hour or two talking about what the company does.
Yeah.
And if you're a software engineer, your first job is to get the company's product up and running on your local development environment. This is a huge stumbling block for a lot of interns. Or if you are in some non-technical internship, you're going to have to understand very quickly what the actual work process of your team looks like, what the deliverables your team is responsible for looks like, and you're going to have to get up to speed with the tools and the terms and the processes used to create those deliverables. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge predictor of how successful someone's going to be in an 8 or 10 or 12-week internship. If, are they getting their environment up and running either on the code side or on the process side so that they can start producing output? Is that taking a day or two, or is that taking a week or two? That's a huge predictor.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that skill set come from to be able to join a new environment and start being productive right away? Well, that comes from doing stuff, that comes from making things. When you are in class, you are basically responsible for learning things, and then the homework and projects are very prescriptive. They tell you, here's what you need to do, here's the rubric. Maybe your final project has a little more independence to it, but very rarely does a professor ever say to the class, all right, go do something.
Yeah.
But when you're joining, especially a smaller company, that's sometimes how it is. You just kind of have to go do something. And so getting good at just going and doing something is in itself, I think, the most valuable skill you can have. And you develop that through projects, through competitions, hackathons, pitched competitions, and all of the things that go into building your portfolio, like creating that website, creating content,
Yeah.
creating independent, ideas with your friends. So yeah, that's I think like more than any specific skill. More than oh, should I learn Python or should I learn JavaScript? Should I be a project manager or should I be a content marketer? Like those questions,
Listen.
they matter, but the most important question is is just, can you show up day one and figure out what's going on, figure out how you can contribute, and then just start executing. And again, in a big company, you're going to get a lot more structure to help out with that.
Mm-hmm.
But what startups are really looking for is someone who can come in day one and make an impact without getting their hand held too much. Obviously, you're going to get a ton of mentorship and a ton of support from the more senior people on your team at any good company, including a startup. I'm not saying that they're just
Yeah.
going to throw you to the wolves. But in order to prove that you're worth investing that amount of time in, you're going to
Yeah.
need to show them that you have independent initiative and that you have the basic capabilities of going and building something on your own. Once you can do that, they'll be happy to help you, figure out what to build and give you the tools you need to do it.
I agree. I mean, I remember having this conversation about an year ago with someone about asking the same question: Python versus JavaScript, which is a, if you guys don't know, it's a very long debate. of software developers, Python versus JavaScript on Twitter, some for some reason. But that person told to me, doesn't matter, just get better at problem solving.
Exactly.
That's all we care about. The code might be in Rust for all you know, so it doesn't really matter which language you know or which tech stack you go for. You just need to be good at problem solving. That's the skill we are looking for, at least in a startup. So I think that resonates really well with what you just said.
So you asked about personal branding at one point, and one of the best things that you can do for your brand is just always be talking about it when it makes sense. So I'll say thank you so much for having me on the episode. And you can find me at philipkiely.com, philipkiely.com. You can find my books. If you're a Grinnell College student, send me an email. I'll send you a free copy of anything. I'm actually working on this new guide to cold email, free for college students. And if you want to hear more of my podcasts or see other work, that's all listed on my website. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. Just search my name and I'll be there.
That's awesome. So, if you guys are interested in learning more about technical writing or even software development in general, definitely shoot Philip an email. I will also have the email and all the links that he mentioned in the description of the podcast. So definitely check that out if you're interested. Thank you so much, Philip, for coming in today. It was a pleasure talking to you, and it's always an exciting time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I love this new format, love the video, love the energy you're bringing to the podcast, and I'm excited to
Thank
see
you.
where this goes.
Of course, for sure. And with that, thank you so much, for all the listeners for tuning in. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully, you got something from this episode. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you.